Hey everybody, I'm Will from Downtime Activities, and today we're starting kind of a new video series, or what I hope will be kind of a recurring video series, just going over RPGs that aren't D&D and Pathfinder and what makes them unique, what makes them kind of cool, and just what they do well. And today we're starting with one that's become a personal favorite for us around here recently, which is the Savage Worlds system.
Savage Worlds is a tabletop role-playing game system presented as sort of a catch-all rule system for any setting or style of campaign. There are dozens of pre-built setting books for it with optional rules, weapons, character abilities, and pages of contextual knowledge that the GM needs to run the game in that particular setting. There are even licensed setting books like Solomon Kane, Flash Gordon, and even one for Pirates of the Spanish Main, that weird and cool little card collecting game where you build tiny ship models and sail them around on the table. The best known setting is probably Deadlands, which is a sort of dark western set in an alternate reality USA with steampunk, gothic horror, and cosmic horror elements. A lot of Savage Worlds rules and settings are meant to hit the pulp adventure genre, but the system was designed with the intention to run literally any type of campaign, from fantasy to gritty historical fiction to modern post-apocalyptic or full-blown sci-fi.
The rule system here is catch-all, which means it can kind of come across as a little vague at times. In my opinion, the best way to start is knowing the type of campaign that you want to run. If you know you want to do a setting in the 1920s with kind of Cthulhu-esque horror elements, then the system really becomes kind of just plug and play when you have any kind of specificity to aim it towards. Now, just because it's a catch-all rule system with a lot of optional rules and expansions, it's actually really, really good. And I don't want the fact that it's sort of basic and general to turn anybody off from this system. The two best parts of this are really the character creation and the core gameplay to a lot of regards, but the character creation in itself is something kind of really special, so that's just something we're going to go ahead and get into.
Like a lot of tabletop systems, your character's basic mechanics come down to a stat array. In this case, there are 5 basic stats called attributes, which are agility, smarts, spirit, strength, and vigor. Unlike systems like Pathfinder and D&D, where this stat is represented by a number, this stat is instead represented by a die type, from a D4 up to a D12. This is part of the core mechanic of Savage Worlds. Instead of rolling a D20 to determine success or failure, you're rolling a different type of die depending on your skills or stats for the type of roll being called for, but we'll get to that into the next section. The next thing you have, like most other tabletop RPGs, is an array of skills. These are linked to attributes, so climbing is linked to strength, fighting and shooting are linked to agility, repair is linked with smarts, persuasion is linked with spirit, etc. Now, a lot of systems give you every skill and then lets you be proficient or specialize in some, but in Savage Worlds you have to buy skills if you want them at all. This doesn't mean that making a check in a skill you don't have is an automatic failure, but it does impose heavy penalties. Part of why I like this is that it tends to either create specialized characters, and thus sets your characters in contrast to one another and give each their niche to shine, assuming you have a balanced party with varying skill sets, and we all know that never happens. Or you end up with true jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none characters who have a lot of varying skills, but not a lot of ranks in any. Skills are always bought at a D4 and then raised from there. So just because you have a high agility attribute doesn't mean you automatically have a high piloting skill if you only buy it at rank 1. Skills being linked to attributes just makes it easier to raise those skills if the attribute is higher, and you can rank skills up past their linked attributes, so being good at a skill doesn't require having a high linked attribute. There isn't really a health point system in Savage Worlds. Instead, you have a toughness rating, which is sort of a damage threshold, and then this is affected by your vigor rank. In the same way, what in D&D or Pathfinder is an armor class, as in the number someone needs to roll in order to hit, you have a parry number here, which is affected partially by armor, but mostly by your fighting skill. This is actually something I really like, since a skilled but unarmored combatant is going to be better at not getting hit than an unskilled combatant in heavy armor. And armor mostly just affects that toughness threshold, which we'll get into more in the gameplay breakdown. The true thing that makes character creation interesting, however, and one of the things that sets Savage Worlds as a whole out on its own, are edges and hindrances. Savage Worlds has no character classes. Instead, it has a large pool of what are called edges, which are sort of like feats in D&D, but much more varied. As you rank up through the system, you have the option to increase skills, buy new skills, raise attributes, or gain new edges. If you're the type of person who likes optimizing certain skills or abilities or aims for builds, this is an excellent system for you, since it gives you a lot of room to play. Those of you who are more focused on the character, their flaws, beliefs, and goals, this next bit might get your attention. The other side of edges are hindrances, which can be taken at character creation in order to increase starting funds, gain more edges, or boost skills. Hindrances are split into major and minor, and at character creation you can choose 1 major and 2 minor hindrances, and word of advice, you always should. Some hindrances give actual mechanical detriments, like the lame hindrance decreases your movement, or mean giving you a negative to rolls relying on charisma. But many hindrances don't have any number crunching statistical detriment. They're only RP focused, like illiterate or greedy. On top of that, a lot of hindrances are things that society tends to view as good or desirable, like code of honor, heroic, and loyal. Hindrances represent things likely to cause your character trouble in some fashion, whether that's negative character traits, physical drawbacks, or positive character traits that tend to get you involved in the drama of the story. They also give a character a sense of history, and helps to ground them in the world, since a lot of them have a story of some sort attached to them. Virtually every extra setting book has more edges and hindrances, a little better tailored to that world in particular, which always ensures you have a lot of options. If you've played a tabletop RPG like D&D or Pathfinder, most of the core gameplay here will look very familiar to you. The Game Master calls for a skill check, and you roll to determine success or failure, based off of a specific check the GM calls for. As I said earlier, this isn't a D20-based system. In fact, about the only die you won't ever roll is a D20, since skills and attributes only get up to a D12. In most cases, an average check is only looking for a 4 for a success. More difficult checks can get up to a 6 or 8, but not often are they higher than that. Obviously, the higher the die you're rolling, the less likely you are to fail. In most cases, rolling 4 above the target number is considered a raise, which is like a critical hit in D&D and can give you extra damage dice on an attack or other bonuses. The most important detail is the wild die, which in most cases is a D6. Player characters and important NPCs are called wild cards, which means they can take more wounds in combat, get access to more edges, and have a few other bonuses. All wild cards, when they make a roll their wild die as well, and take the higher result of the 2. Savage Worlds also uses an exploding dice system, which means if you roll max on a die, you roll again, which the system calls an ace. If you keep rolling max, you keep rolling. I know this is a lot to dump on you, but let's use an example and see if that makes it any clearer. Your Game Master calls for a hard stealth roll, and you have 3 ranks in stealth for a D8. You roll a D8 for your stealth roll, and a D6 for your wild die. Now, if it's a hard roll, you're looking to beat an 8. You roll 2 6s, one on the D8 and one on the D6. You roll the D6 again since it aced, and add it to the original number. It's a 3, putting you at a total of 9, so you can take that result instead of the 6 on the D8. Combat works much the same way. If you're making a ranged attack, you use your shooting skill, and you're looking to beat a 4 at close range for the weapon, a 6 for the medium range, and an 8 for the long range. Obviously, this means that each weapon's range bands are different, and edges, armor, and environmental effects can make your shooting roll harder or easier. In melee combat, you make a fighting skill check, and you're looking to beat whatever your opponent's parry score is. You then roll damage without your wild die. If it meets or is up to 3 points higher than your opponent's toughness, they're shaken, which is sort of like a stun effect. If you get a raise over their toughness, meaning you beat it by 4 or more, they take a wound. Wild cards can take 3 wounds before they go down, and extras, which is everyone else, go down when they're wounded. If you get more than 1 raise on your damage roll, you can cause more than 1 wound in a single attack.
Obviously, though, if you're anything like me, you learned to never trust a Game Master, so let's go ahead and hear from some of our players and see what they like about it.
So, Savage Worlds, some of my favorite things about Savage Worlds is the character customization, and specifically the magic system I've really enjoyed. The different ways that you can customize what spells you can cast and how they're cast, and what you can do with that. Like, not necessarily just you throw a fireball at a guy, but you can create barriers, and you can mess with the environment, and you can really play around with the different elements of the game a lot more efficiently, in my opinion, or in a lot more customized of a way. So you don't have to have a different spell that's flame wall or water wall. You can just have a wall spell that then, however your character would do it, they can do it that way. They can create that wall.
I like this whole the Savage World system because it is very easy to understand for new people coming into the tabletop RPG. element or lifestyle, I guess you could call it, whatever you want. Me, like myself, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't know how any of the systems work. Savage Worlds is simple enough for newcomers to come in, create a character, have some fun, and really learn a system that's quick. It's not too complicated, and it's overall just been a fun system to play with.
I am a big fan of the Savage Worlds system. I've gotten to be a player in a couple of games now. All of them have been run by Will. I haven't gotten to run a game yet myself, but playing in it, I really, really enjoy. It's a super cool system. It's really good for taking kind of different ideas for settings and characters and doing something different than your classic fantasy D&D style world. It's really good with having very expressive, interesting worlds. We've done everything from chasing down weird voodoo zombies through sewer systems in Louisiana to being space pirates and swinging from ship to ship screaming out tally-ho. It's a very, very varied system, and you can do all sorts of really cool things with it. The big highlight of it, in my opinion, my viewpoint, is the edges and hindrance system. Edges and hindrances make for really cool and unique characters, and the hindrances are honestly the best part of it. You have hindrances that are good things, being heroic or brave, things that are good but can get you in trouble. And you have hindrances that add characters, add character relationships, add enemies that are out in the world. All of it to make your character much more grounded and interesting. And I haven't had a single character so far that hasn't seemed super interesting and cool because almost entirely the edges and hindrance system.
Some other great things about the system is the simplicity of rolls, so you don't have to worry about hitting any kind of DC between 10 and 20. You can just say, oh, I rolled a 4 or a 6 or an 8, and you know where that lines up on the success range, depending on how difficult the action you're trying to accomplish is. And just the ability to create interesting characters in a very simplified way, just choosing traits and edges that benefit your character or make them interesting, and just feed together into fun synergies, can be pretty interesting.
We're doing it like a Treasure Planet run. The idea of how ships work, having rations for when you're traveling long distances, it makes it a lot more interesting because obviously you have to travel over the course of days, so you have to make sure you're stocked up on rations. You have to have a crew to operate the ships, so it's a nice little touch to the system.
So the best part of the system is that an optional rule is whenever you hit somebody with an attack, you can always roll off of what they call the injury table. And these injuries can be anything from you shot a guy, did you shoot him in the shoulder, did you shoot him in the stomach, to you're in an upscale fencing competition and your first move is a parry thrust straight to the ball sack, and if he had survived, he would never have children. Luckily, that's not a problem. I am a big fan. Is it Savage Worlds? Savage Worlds.
Savage Worlds.
Not why. I keep wanting to call it Savage Lands. Every goddamn time. I'm a big fan of this thing I don't know the name of.
What's it called?
I am a big. I'm a big Lands of Savage.
Lands of Chaos and Fury. Savage Lands.
Worlds.
Clearly a big fan.
Turned on him so quickly.
Oh no. Savage Worlds.